Good morning, everyone. Afternoon or evening, wherever you are, at the time that you joining us. We wanted to welcome you to the level set. We want to re-engage in this conversation about the Colored Convention as we unpack where we are, how we got here, and give credit where credit is due and pick up the mantle where we should and progress as best we could with the mindset of having a 100, 150, 200 year succession plan for those that thirst for freedom and peace. So, with no further ado, this morning I will reintroduce to most and introduce to some Dr. Charles Alexander. For my money, one of the finest minds of the 21st century. So, Dr. Alexander, let's pick up on this conversation that we started last year, and we have began to unpack more and more as we look at the brilliance of the ancestors.
Absolutely, absolutely. Good morning, folks. Good morning. Um, so, so last week or the past couple of weeks, we have been talking about we charge genocide, and um, and we were discussing the range of issues, economic, educational, um, franchise, those things. And when I say the franchise, I mean voting. So like our political rights, um, those things that were important in in 1951, um, and the context in which that charge was levied, and to help us to understand that what we're seeing today, there's nothing new about what we're seeing today. What we're seeing today is just the current manifestation of the challenge, but that our challenge has been consistent throughout time. And in my general concern, and that Attorney Fields, is that particularly around election time, we start to hear voices say, we need a Black agenda. But a close look at history will show that our agenda really has never changed. We have a stated agenda, and we've been pursuing that agenda since we've been here. Go ahead, brother.
Let me just add this, Doc. I'm going to go directly to the book. There is an incredible website, but Doc, you just hearkened something that is so unbelievably on point. That's in the first few pages of this book, and this is a copy of the book, The Colored Conventions Moment. But this is in 1830. I'm reading directly from the book. Henry Highland Garnett made clear in his opening of an address to the slaves of the United States of America, the most famous speech to emerge from the conventions. Free, freed, and self-emancipated Black people organized in the face of tightly constricting legal and voting rights, responding to shrinking job opportunities as white immigrant populations spread and as universal manhood suffrage expanded unevenly for whites only. So with respect to the agenda that you mentioned, Doc, I don't think that we've gotten away from the 1830 agenda that you referenced, and I just wanted to add a parenthetical there. So please pick up where you were, Doc.
Yeah. And so we have to look at the history of organizing. And and so again, we're gonna have to do a lot of kind of jumping around. Um, but we want to consider some important dates from a national perspective. But there will necessarily be times when we kind of, you know, there will be times where we highlight some more local types of events that occurred that even spurred what we're talking about at the national level, right? So, because like when we talk about the national convention, so the national conventions started in 1830, but there were necessarily, a range of local activities that occurred that precipitate the national events, right? And so we will get to those, but we're going to start with 1830, and well, we're going to start a little bit before 1830, but those things that we start with before 1830 also turned into national events. And so what we're looking at here is agency, and our response to our historical collective response to oppression. And there's a subset of us who believe that we've just been here and docile, and that whatever it is that we've achieved, actually we haven't even really achieved. That whatever it is that has accrued to us because at some point white folks just made a decision to do different, and that's not true. And so there's never been a time when where we just settled for the circumstance. And so as we have these discussions about our social and political development here, of course, again, we will have to have conversations that kind of bounce back and forth between national movements and local movements. And when we get to those local spaces, we'll have to talk about, we'll necessarily have to talk about things that people were doing on the ground to battle slavery and just our overall subjugation and the lack of rights that even free Africans had at those times, because that's another piece that I don't think gets flushed out in most conversations, and really is another of the motivating factors even for the national movement, because you had across the early development of this thing that we call the United States, even in so-called free spaces, you had legislation that said, Negroes or coloreds or blacks can't live here, right? And Negroes, coloreds, or blacks couldn't work, and Negroes, coloreds, or blacks couldn't vote. So even the free population, depending on, where they lived had, tremendous hardships in order to make a way. So we're going to bounce around a little bit, but we're going to try to shape this thing around the convention movement first. That's kind of how we want to shape this thing. And when we talk about the Negro Convention movement, we're looking at from the 1830s to the 1890s. All right. So I think it's necessary that we start with a couple of things prior to the 1830s that have significant influence, on this, and one being Prince Hall Masonry, and so of which I too am a Prince Hall Mason, but so Prince Hall Masonry could be argued that is the oldest Black national organization in the United States. Prince Hall Masonry was established in 1784, and comes about because Prince Hall, a gentleman, an artisan, born in Barbados, made his way to the U.S. Sought admittance. Short answer is, he sought admittance into the existent Masonic structure, and was denied, of course, because he was Black. He and several other gentlemen were able to get be raised and initiated, passed and raised in the Masonic order through a British military lodge, but they weren't recognized by the colonial folks. They eventually seek a charter from the Grand Lodge. I think the Grand Lodge of England. They get it, and in 1784 they establish the African Lodge, and so that's the first lodge. And in most of this that we discuss, we're going to be talking about like the north. What is the Northeast? So we'll be looking at Boston. We'll be looking at Philadelphia and things of that nature. Then we'll be looking at the Northwest Territories. So we'll be looking at Ohio, and these are formative spaces. And so we have Prince Hall Masonry, and of course we know that this is essentially, it's a brotherhood. It's a fraternal organization, but the purpose of it really is to serve the public. So we see our genesis as a national, our I guess you say our agency, our self-determination reflected at a national level starts probably with Prince Hall Masonry. All right. And then from Prince Hall Masonry, we then look at the AME Church, and um, and so and there we're looking at, you know, Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, and Richard Allen, by the way, too, is a Prince Hall Mason, and so we see the establishment of the AME Church in 1787, and so the AME Church emerges because we have Black folks, including, you know, Richard Allen and Absalom Jones in Philadelphia, who are worshiping in a Methodist church, but are relegated to the balcony, right? They don't want the people, you know, on the main level, and they don't want the people at the altar. And on a particular Sunday or a day of worship, whatever it may have been, they were at the altar kneeling and were made to arise because that wasn't a Black space. And so a lot of the things that I've read suggest that that was kind of, you know, that happened that time, and that they, you know, based on that, you know, they decided that they would leave that church and start their own church. But I can sense that that was really kind of the nature of their existence in that church, right? That this wasn't a one-off. This was how they were being treated, and disregarded their personhood, and disregarded, you know, the means and their needs for worship and praise, right? So they leave, and they establish their own society, the Free African Society, and I think what's necessary when we think about Prince Hall, and we think about the AME Church, and we think about the precursor to the AME Church, so the Free African Society in 1787, and then the AME Church proper, 1794, and Prince Hall Masonry in 1784. Keyword phrase is African. So the first lodge in Prince Hall Masonry is the African Lodge. That first corporal, you know, Black church, you know, was in the context of the Free African Society. And then we have the African Methodist Episcopal Church. We were calling ourselves African, right? And so that's, you know, that's in excess of 100 years into this thing, right? You know, at least 100 years into this thing as it pertains to our relationship to the British. Because another thing that we'll have to talk about, and we'll weave into this, is that, you know, we came here before them, you know, so you know, we'll have to look at the works Lerone Bennett. We'll have to look at the works of Ivan Van Sertima and others, but primarily those gentlemen, and lay out that we had contact with what is called the New World prior to the Spanish and the Portuguese, but in the context of human trafficking, I believe it's the Portuguese who kind of kick off this transatlantic type of peace. And so in the context of trafficking, I think we've been here since, the 1500s, right? So, I mean, we'll weave that stuff in as well. And so, but as it pertains to our relationship with the British and then the formation of the United States, we see that in that period of time from 1619 to 1784, there's clearly a regional identity that rests upon our Africans. And I suppose it could be argued at that point that that is necessarily a national identity, because we're only talking about 13 colonies at that time. And so we see that sense of agency. We want a measure of inclusivity, not because we want to necessarily be with white folks, but because we see value in specific organizations, and there's a need. So we had corporative needs. So we had needs for very, very practical things. So at local levels, you have people talking about mutual aid societies. And so what happens with mutual aid societies? And so, I mean, essentially you're talking about what we would consider, what we consider insurance. So we need burial insurance. We need the equivalent to like Social Security. We need, so we need aid for those who are unable to take care of themselves. And so you start to, we are coalescing around those types of issues, the needs of the collective. And so that's what motivates, and we have our needs for spiritual growth. And so that's what motivates, Prince Hall Masonry, and then the rise of the AME Church. And so, and to be clear again, that when it becomes apparent to us that even in what we perceive to be free spaces, that we would be excluded when we choose our own, and create our own, we create African institutions. So I think that's necessary for us to recognize and to acknowledge, and particularly in the context of the AME Church because it continues to be the AME Church, right? It continues to be the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Then there was a point at which there was a split in there. You have the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. But again, the piece is African, right? And so, what we want to keep in mind is that we have, relative to our time here, we've always been organizing. Because again, in order for us to, so when we look at the Free African Society, when we look at the African Methodist Church, when we look at Prince Hall, those things started off as local activities that grew into, national movements, both of which are really kind of literally grown into international movements, that we were always seeking ways to exercise our agency. We were always self-determined. And, our conversations, our subsequent conversations about the convention movement, it's just going to show us how that looked for what was considered a national movement, but it will also encompass some state and regional convention conversations, right? Because we can't have a national movement if there's no agency at the local level. And I think that's very important for us now, because we have a significant number of people who vote in national politics and don't vote in local contests. And it's the local contests that really kind of dictate your quality of life. And so, so our goals here are, they're just several. You have just the pure historical, importance of what we're talking about, and then, but like more importantly, I think we want to operationalize the legacy. Because as we've talked about before, we are our ancestors' grandest, da 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 da. And there are a lot of ways in which we're underperforming. And in regard to that, given our access to resources now that our ancestors didn't have, and what they were able to do, and how they did it, given the dictates of the times. What do you think about that, Attorney Fields?
I think that everything you stated is should be highlighted, and each one of those topics is almost a doctoral study, if you will, with the sort of practical applications that are necessary. I want to go back and just bring up the fact that, as you stated, we have been fighting since we got over here. What's often missed is that there were, prior to Bellum, there were 490,000 free, Africans in the United States.
Correct.
We act as if everyone over here was subject to the lash, but there were, almost 500,000 free Africans here, and the thing that is really deserves critical analysis is why the organizers of these institutions, so close to the beginning of the Atlantic slave trade, identified them with African in the monikers. We need to
Say that part again.
I think we need to, I mean, as you indicated, the uh, uh, just the cogency of having African in the titles so close to the beginning of, or much closer than we are now, to the beginning of the transatlantic slave movement. So we need to ask ourselves why. And I think you will find some answers if you ask yourself why. I think we'll find some answers there. I think we'll find some healing there. But the other thing that you raised that is so important is that oftentimes we have the posture that we're a conquered people. We act like a conquered people, like we're subject to whatever the society puts before us. Number one, all of us weren't subject to the lash. Number two, we've been fighting since we got over here. Number three, the Civil War was part of the revolution that we fought and died for. You know, we've been waiting on this revolution. Well, we had, we had ancestors that committed to life or death for our freedom, and we act as if that was a sponsored activity.
There's somebody did that on our behalf, and I think, I think we need to look at, all of the wars as that, because it exists today for, maybe slightly different reasons, but since we've been here, we've used conflict. We've attempted to levy conflict as a means to establish our worthiness, with with varying levels or various degrees of success with that. But so like even when we talk about the Revolutionary War, you have several of Washington's reports saying, we need to use, the Negroes to fight. We know that the British on the front end of this piece say, you're loyal to the crown, we'll free you. Right. And so the various wars against the native populations, we certainly had circumstances in which we fled and found comfort with the native populations, but we also have situations in which we were conscripted or volunteered and fought against the native populations. And when we jump to post-Civil War, that's really why we see the rise of, that it's in the context of that we see the rise of the Buffalo Soldier, right? And so, so all of this stuff, all of these things are going on all the time. Now, when we get today, I hear, just relative to this military piece, I hear a range of things, I don't necessarily hear people saying, in fact, I don't hear any people saying, I'm gonna join the military, or I want my son and daughter to join the military to prove, to prove to white folks that they worthy. So I don't hear that part anymore. But you do hear people saying, you know, he or she needs to join the military because they need to learn discipline, right? I don't necessarily believe in that, but I know people do. And you know, and then you have people who join the military because they see it as their means of access to whatever this thing has to offer, right? And then and one of those things being being education. So people join it, you know, for access to benefits that you know, allow you to levy life. Good morning, Attorney Christmas.
Morning.
And we're talking about,
Good morning.
we're having a conversation about the, or we're framing our conversation again about the Negro Convention movement. And at this particular moment, discussing our historical relationship to the military. And so that part of it has changed a bit, but you know, so again, so we got people who join because they say they want to serve the country. We got people who join who want access to the resources that, you know, that relationship yields, and we have people that join because it's a career option, right? So we have all those things, as opposed to on the front end of this thing, we have people joining because they're trying to prove that, you know, that they're loyalists and that they are brave and that they are able. So that part, you know, I don't think that it's totally gone away. I'm just saying that's not necessarily the you know, the stated purpose for people joining. And so, like, what has been your experience in that regard, Attorney Fields?
Economics.
Mm-hmm.
It's purely economics. I mean, there was a time when my financial future doing undergrad would have lent itself to me joining ROTC or joining the military myself. You know, being an individual that funded my own undergraduate and graduate education, by and large. So, and that is what I continue to see. And also now there were a few individuals that I've known that saw the short retirement sunset and horizon of 20 years. After being in 20 years, you can retire with retirement benefits. Of course, those are graduated the longer you're in. So I do not remember meeting a single individual that has considered the military for the pure um, uh, patriotical aspect of it. Even, you know, now my son and we visited the academies, Air Force Academy. We visited the Air Force Academy, and we spoke with our representative at the time, which was Bill Clay, who was willing to give my son a recommendation if that's what he wanted to do. And you know how powerful that is. But even in those conversations, nothing was talked, you know, no one talked about the benefit, or maybe it was just assumed, the benefit of being patriotic. What was talked about was, just as you stated, the discipline. Now, the individuals in the House of Representatives and the Senate, and Jerryl, you can speak to this more than I can with respect to being there. But the representatives and the senators love interns from any of the academies because they are disciplined self-starters, and they do, you know, do exactly what you ask them to do. The other thing was they're paid to go to school. So I mean, they got a paycheck, full benefits and so forth because they were actual government employees. But but like I said, and as you stated, there was absolutely at this point in it, there's nothing that I think out of the list of 10 attributes joining the military, love of country, I think may either it's implied, uh, uh, zero, highest, or it's just cognitively there at 10 out of 10.
Mhm. Your thoughts
I,
on that,
I would,
Attorney?
I was just gonna say I would agree with that. In our generation, I think everybody went to the military for financial reasons, or if they wanted to get an education, they didn't have the money to get the education, so they went to the military to pay for it. I remember when I was in law school, when I was getting out of law school, I was thinking about going to the military because I was checking to see, um, what would be the benefit of that on the back end as far as taking care of student loans and those kind of issues. So I think it was more of a patriotic endeavor, and also I think it was very much an economic endeavor too for generations prior to us, especially when we had the draft. They didn't have a choice. I think that was the real issue. So many of the older men in my family, they were just drafted. They were in the Korean War, Vietnam, or World War II, and they saw significant benefit, especially from being in World War II. Because I remember I had when I got ready to go to college, I remember my cousin that was just a few years ahead of me. He had went to college before me, and my uncle had bought him a brand new car, one of those Trans Ams. Remember when the Trans Ams came out with the bird on the hood? He had got him a brand new Trans Am, and I was telling my father, I was like, "Dad, I want Trans Am like Kenny got." And he was like, "That ain't happening." But what I didn't know was that Kenny was going to school for free, because his dad had been, in World War II. Not only, and I just found this out maybe a couple of years ago. Not only was he going to school free, he was getting a stipend every month too. And so when you think about that, the benefits that they received back then, um, tremendously outweighed the benefit now. But then it was also a rule in my house, that you was gonna have to do one of three things. You either going to college, or you was going to trade school, or you going to the military. But you was gonna have to get out of here.
Mm-hmm. And
With those benefits though, even today, if you have a military person that has been disabled and they live in Illinois, their children can go to any Illinois school they get into for free, and the government will pick the tab up.
Really?
Yes.
I still think, it's a good option, especially when you don't have a plan and a purpose. And I tell you this from when I worked in the prosecutor's office, and I wish they would go back to doing this. But when I first started working in the prosecutor's office, which would have been 94, when you were a first time offender and you were going into the military, we would drop the charges if we had proof. Like if I talked to a recruiter and you were definitely getting ready to go in, and of course, if it wasn't a severe violent charge, we would drop the charges so you could go into the military. And I'm still an advocate for some type of program like that, even if I'm still an advocate for it, even if they have a prior, because there needs to be um, a place and system for people to go to where they can be successful and get some earnings and some benefits. And it would, I think, make a tremendous effect in our community if a lot of these individuals, especially these first-time offenders, if we could get them in the military. And I used to be kind of anti-military, and it's interesting that you say that, um, Larry, because when I worked in Senator McCaskill's office, we always had a high-level official doing a internship, a high-level military official doing an internship. in the senator's office, and one time we had this brother interning, and I forgot what his rank was, but he had a high rank, and he and I got to be real cool, and we got to talking about the military. And he said, "Look here, Jay, I'm gonna tell you this. You can take 100 brothers. You can leave 50 on the street, or you can put the other 50 in the military. And I guarantee you, the 50 you put in the military are gonna turn out better than the 50 you left on the street." And you really just couldn't argue with that.
I don't think we can take any option off the table. And I know we're getting away from the conversation a little bit, but the benefits of going to the military, well, you talked about the JAG Corps, which is phenomenal. But the benefit, one of the benefits is if you get out of the military and you start your own business, you start a government contracting business, they set
Mhm.
you up, they set you up and you get priority. You get, and then if you're a disabled veteran, you get priority on those contracts. So, I mean, you become a middleman or a middlewoman um, in that vein and take care of generations of your family, providing socks to the military. I know we're getting away from the topic, but I mean, I think as we look at liberation and freedom, we cannot take any option off the table, and that's a legitimate, viable one. But the downside is like when I went outside on I think it was Tuesday, the coldest day that we had of the year. First thing that for some reason I said, wow. Now, if I was in the military, somebody could tell me to stand here for the next 8 hours and there was nothing I can do about it, except stand there for the next 8 hours in that cold. So,
Mhm.
but I mean, that's
They would give you some equipment though for the call.
they give you some equipment, but
Maybe.
government issue. And so
Yes.
that's the issue. But go ahead, Doc. We get
Well, I mean, so all of those things, and I mean, we weren't necessarily off topic. I introduced it because all of these things have existed, in the context of, of our trials. Um, I mean, but this thing still is what it is. So one of the things you also become when you enter the United States military is cannon fodder. And so that that's that too has to be, considered. But when we look at this thing, we thought it to be a strategy on the front end. We continue to think it a strategy now, and and when we look at points of time, like I mean, going back to what we're talking about. So so when we look at the beginning of this piece, and we look at the convention movement, okay, so we have and we start, we predate the convention movement with Prince Hall Masonry. Prince Hall Masonry comes about because of a military affiliation,
Mhm.
right? And so,
that's correct. That is
right,
correct.
and so then you put, looking at, kind of some of the constants or the standards in terms of our rise. So you have Prince Hall Masonry, and then you have the AME Church, and then you have Richard Allen, who is, the the principal in the rise of the AME Church, who is also a Prince Hall Mason, and it's he who convenes the first of the Negro conventions.
Mhm.
Not only convenes them, but it's my understanding that he housed them as well.
Yeah, well, I think the first two are at Bethel.
And then your position is that he learned to be an organizer and to do those things from his military background?
Well, not necessarily Richard Allen, but I'm saying, I mean, and I'm not even sure that he even has a military background. I'm just saying
Okay.
that he was a Prince Hall Mason, and
Oh, and they
yeah,
originated from the
yeah,
military.
yeah,
Okay, I got
yeah,
it.
yeah. But and so we have these things that are kind of like constants and standards, and we find ourselves today in conversations, about which way we're gonna go and what we're gonna use, and many of the same resources, many of the same decisions that we're making today are the same decisions we've ever had to make, and that's why we want to. That's why we want to look at the convention movement, because I think we can agree that the same things that were important in colonial in this in the colonies for free and enslaved Africans are the same things that are pertinent for us today. And we need not spend time trying to figure out what's important for us today, because it's fairly obvious, right? And we need not waste time, not even spend time. We need not waste time waiting on the Messiah. Because first of all, he ain't coming. Not the Messiah we're waiting for. And we have the agency. And so when we look at
But the problem when you say that, when you say wait on the Messiah, that's in our religious practice, that's how we talk of, and that's sometimes that gives you a conflict that makes it problematic for people like myself, because we are taught so much to wait on the Lord, give it to God, to just act as if a spirit is just going to come down and solve our problems for us, and it's not going to be us. And I think that is that's a thought that is perpetuated too highly in Black religion.
We have this external locus of control phenomenon going on that belies the historical record. Because
even if the white throne judgment is on its way, we still need to take care of what we need to take care of today.
Right. And I think that's what we should be preaching in the churches.
That's
and
what
and we're not doing it. It's what is the faith without work is dead.
that's correct.
We are not overemphasizing the fact that yes, you must pray, you must have faith, but you have got to work. You have got to get out here and make something happen. Larry, you don't know how many people have been over your office before. I know in mine, and they say, they just say, well, I'm just gonna turn it over to the Lord. And you sitting there thinking, no, you gotta do more than that.
Well,
that is not gonna be your
so
soul's
that's a
answer.
manifestation. So many of us think that is a reflection of our faith, but really it's a flight of fantasy, right? And so, but again, I think that's another reason why it's important for us to pivot towards the convention movement. Because why?
Because they laying out a plan.
Because Bishop Allen in Bethel Church, Bishop Allen of the AME Church in Bethel Church, Bishop Allen in AME Church in Bethel Church hosted the first color convention. And so there's agency in the church. We're not doing that the way that we should be doing that. But that's how this thing started. That's where this thing started.
Exactly. I'm with you 100% on that, Brother Alexander. We need a color convention right now. We need one like right now. Because seriously, in the times that we in right now, what we headed into with this election and other things that are going on in the country, because we know, regardless of how the election turns out, we headed towards a revolution. As we approach, especially the beginning of 2025, because that's when it's going to all go down. We're going to have the election in November, depending on, if clearly if Trump doesn't win by landslide, all of his people are not going to abide by what has been happening before constitutional change of power. We saw the beginning of that from January 6th, but it's going to intensify. We already know that because it's already a buildup to that. And then if he does win by landslide, what does that mean? You know, is that going to be the end of democracy, as everybody is forecasting? So we headed for some type of collision. What it's going to be, I don't know, but it's clear that we're getting ready for some major issues to break. And like you saying, with the convention, we're not organized around those issues, nor do we have a strategy of how we're going to deal with it as a people, especially when we talk about like the border issues. And, you know, look at the problems that you all having in Chicago with, you know, the immigrants coming into the city and the resources that they're taking from us. I have humanity for all of those individuals, but I had to prioritize my own people. Survival is the first rule in nature, and we can't afford for any other group to take resources from us. We have been the number one minority in this country, and we have been suffering. What status will we be in, or where will we be if we fall to third or fourth minority in this country?
You know,
It's,
Joe, let me say, Doc, I'm real quick.
but
There's some well-meaning churches out there. You know, we're not saying that they're not. Shout out to Dr. Bonner over at First Baptist and Keith Troy at New Salem in Columbus, Ohio. But Gerald, that's the first time publicly I've heard someone speak on an immigration issue from our community that hasn't deferred to benevolent disposition and standing on top of the Statute of Liberty. But prior to, you know, earlier today, I read from the convention that the convention in 1830 had 3 issues that they were working on. And I know you can give, if I told you right now, Gerald, yeah, list the 3 issues that are pressing, there were the same 3 issues that were pressing then. The first one was voters' rights and suffrage. The second one was jobs in 1830, well-paying jobs. And the third was white immigrants that were coming in, taking up resources that would become
Taking up resources,
in
exactly.
1830. And we
Right.
don't have the sense to say, hey, wait a minute. The data shows that every time a group of immigrants come in, the resources to our community, this is what the data shows. The
Right.
resources to our community are impacted negatively first.
First.
I'm sorry, Dr. Alexander, go ahead.
And you absolutely
even
right. Because when they get ready to cut, we are the first they look to.
That's it. That's it. Like
The
we
only other thing I would add to that list, Larry, is, you know, and it didn't exist, I don't think, back then, is healthcare.
Well, yeah.
no,
That's the only thing, because
that
you know,
that was
healthcare is
an
my
issue
number
too.
1 priority right now.
Yeah.
But that was an issue too, and that's why we had the mutual aid societies, and that was one of the things that you know, healthcare and the care for the sick is one of those things that Bishop Allen and Absalom Jones did in their battle against yellow fever. You know, and so you saw the Black church, you know, rise to meet the needs of the community and take care of folks who couldn't take care of themselves. Not, you know, from a health perspective, a public health perspective, as well as, you know, spiritual and you know, financial and what have you. And that's what the mutual aid piece was about. So and that's kind of my point. And I think that's even, you know, that's how we got to this point with regard to the Negro Convention movement, is because, as Attorney Fields just said, all of those issues that necessitated the Negro Convention movement are issues today. and we waste time scratching our heads about how we need to proceed when the record has already been established.
And Doc, if you go back and talk about what was the precipice for the chartering of the Negro Convention, the parallels become even realer.
Well, so you got so part of one of the major things that was going on at at the time of the convention is these state exclusionary acts, and so on the one hand, and I think this too, we have to start putting into a we need a certain perspective on it, right? And so all of this is going on post-Revolutionary War and whatever other kind of foolishness that the colonies and Britain were involved in. And we know what war looked like for them at the time, where you like literally go line up and stand in front of each other and shoot. And so you had all of this carnage and all of this loss. One of the things about this experiment a couple of things about this experiment that we don't necessarily talk about, and if we do talk about it, we don't necessarily talk about it honestly, is that that send us your weak, send us your sick, all of that is a labor peace, right? Because this thing was only intended to be a colony. And they sent folks who didn't have jack to start with, and the folks who came that had stuff came to represent the interests of the crown and and private interests, in Britain. But the rest were only supposed to be laborers. And then at the point at which folks start dying, you need free. Well, you already needed free labor. That's why we got here. But then at the point at which the white folks start to die, and then there's a concern about our population and the native population versus the white folks, then you need more of those people. And so you start bringing in, you start importing, you start lobbying for more immigrants, but they needed more male immigrants to come in. And that's what you see over the periods of time. After the Civil War, again, tremendous carnage, loss of white men. You got to bring in more, right? And so all of these things are happening, and all of these things they exist to kind of neutralize our growth and our prosperity, and to kind of stabilize things. And then we look at this piece now. I mean, if you listen and you just kind of surf the various news sources, you can hear across the nation, not the Republicans, you can hear the Democrats. We need these people so that we can, because we got jobs to fill. This is not an accident. This is not an accident that we're having this issue. And even the other day, listening to the news, you have people on the streets, these organizers. The government has to move faster in getting these people work permits and da 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 da. And I don't think that these people are taking resources from us. I think the government is giving our resources to them, right? Because whatever the government's resources are, they are comprised of tax dollars. And so, which is another thing I'm clear that we don't really understand. And so, these things it is about population control, and it is about cheap labor. That hasn't changed. That's what it was about before. And so when we go back again to the impetus for the first one, you know, there were amongst free populations, or amongst the free population of Africans in America, there was literally ethnic cleansing. You had states and territories saying, well, we don't agree with slavery, but you can't live here. And so they were running folks out of Ohio.
It was the exact same displacement that we are turning all of our attention to in Gaza and Cincinnati. And
yes.
roughly in 1830, violent mob ran out over 1,000 free Black individuals from Cincinnati to Canada, because they were exercising their rights to those enumerated laws that you mentioned earlier for free Black people. And so that violent white mob of immigrants ran them over 1,000 to Canada.
And so these are the things that have ever happened, and they continue to happen. We figured out ways to manage those things and to respond before. And if we take a critical look at the record, we can find some answers, and we don't have to keep, spinning our wheels to try to come up with the answers. And it should allow us to take a critical look at, most things, that there's, as that book says, there's nothing new under the sun. And so we have to stop acting as such. And if we're going to, if we're going to, kind of, employ and throw around, our, one of our favorite tropes, we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. And then let's tap into the ancestors. If we look at the record, because the other magnificent thing about the color convention movement is that there are meeting minutes. There are meeting minutes, and one of the things that I think, so Attorney Christmas, you said, we need a Negro convention. Now, I think we have a Negro convention all the time. I just don't think that we have. I just don't think that they are productive. We have every year, Sigmas have a convention. Every year, the Alphas have a convention. Every year, we, the Noops, have a convention. And every year, the Qs have a convention. And every year, the Deltas and the AKAs and the Zetas and Sigma Gamma Rho, SG Rhos have a convention. We have all these conventions. And then there's a national Pan Hale convention. And then we have a series of regional conventions. And, Prince Hall does the same thing. And we have conventions. But what comes out of them?
The difference, though, is that
we need to be looking at the entire agenda, because I think what we do focus on, and throw Jack and Jill and the Lynx and all them other jokers in there too, I think what we consistently focus on is education, which is fine. I don't think we have the necessary depth and width in our proceedings across organizations for the things that require our attention. I'm sorry, go ahead, Attorney Christmas.
No, I agree with you 100% on that. It's problematic, very problematic, because I was thinking, before you even said that, I was thinking, who could convene those conventions now? And it already crossed my mind what you had just said. We could convene those conventions now, or as you already indicated, we already have them. They're just not as productive as they need to be, or as critical as they need to be. I think primarily because when those conventions were happening and those things were going on, we were under a significant amount of oppression, and it forced us to have that mindset. By not being under that same amount, or we are under it, you could argue we still under that same amount, but because the living conditions are different, it makes us feel as if we are not. And then we do have people in our community individually who are not collectively, but individually. When we talk about the breakdown, of the Black community, or, Blacks that moved to the suburbs, or now, children that grew up in the suburbs that just don't have any idea about the struggle that we went through in order to get to this point. We just got through with the celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. And it's getting even more. It's really getting worse because it's just getting watered down more and more now than it ever was. And I think that is primarily because, we have lost so many people from that generation now because, Dr. King would be approaching 100 years old. So many people from that generation no longer are living. And it's, for young people coming up, they just take on this whole watered down version of Dr. King. And I think, more individuals in our age group and at least a decade older than us that know better, we really have to drill down with these young people to help them understand and better explain who Dr. King was, the things that he had to go through. Even, this whole idea about the speech. We need to make children read the speech that he gave for the March on Washington, what the real text of that speech was. Not this "I have a dream" part, but what was the real text about? America
I want
writing
my
us
check, partner. That's the text
a
of it.
check.
Where's my
Yeah, it was like, I want my money. We came here for our money. This is check insufficient funds. This is not no "I have a dream." But nobody, we just not saying those things. And I'm as guilty as everybody else. But you after it passes, you realize this was not as substantive as it needed to be, especially if you went to any of these programs.
Jerryl, you raised up 2 points. May I read an excerpt from the Colored Convention book very shortly? You guys have time?
Go ahead.
All
Yes,
right.
go ahead.
Listen, now this is the postbellum period in early January 1865, before the war had ended. Now, the Black-owned New Orleans Tribune, the meeting's official organ, reported that at the convention were seated side by side the rich and the poor, the literate and educated man, and the country laborer, hardly released from bondage, distinguished only by the natural gifts of the mind. There the rich landowner, the opulent tradesman, second motion offered by humble mechanics and freedmen, ministers of the gospel, officers and soldiers of the U.S. Army, men who handled the sword or the pen, merchants and clerks, all the classes of society were represented and united in a common thought, the actual liberation from social and political bondage. When the paper proudly pronounced that the day of the meeting of this convention has inaugurated a new era and underscored that it was the first political move ever made by the colored people of this state acting in a body, it spoke not only for Louisiana, but in terms of political conventions for the whole of the South. That's antithetical to what we're talking about today. And the issue that we've got to get our arms around is this collective us. Mike Jones asked the question all the time, who is us? Who is the community? And we
Right.
got to figure that out. And we got to go with the 5 that we can put on the floor. And we've got to be really cold-blooded about distinguishing those that are not us, that are at the table eating off of us. That's what we've got to do. And, go ahead, Doc. I see you with the.
Well, no, I was going to say we have to figure out. We have to be able to distinguish us, allies, and enemies.
Pattern recognition once again.
pattern recognition. And so we struggle with that. We struggle with that. And so, but that's what we hope to kind of bring into better focus with our deep dive on the conventions, and then within the context, and then also subsequent to the conventions, we're going to also talk about the various manifestos that arise, from, in the context of our other freedom movements. And so we come out, so as we pass through the Negro conventions give rise to a more internationally flavored Pan-Africanist movement. And then that gives us the Garvey movement. And then that gives us, in the midst of all of that, we have, whatever shapes our domestic movements take from, Reconstruction forward, and which in the 1900s take, we get a decidedly Black and African centered infusion with the Garvey movement, and then on, as we progress through the movement, then we get into the the 60s, we get Black power and Black arts, and the Black studies movements. We get so we get all of these things coming forward, and they take a lot of different forms. But what really doesn't change is what our needs are, and that's what we want to show is the continuity over 400 years in terms of what we've been fighting for, so that we are not wasting that time. We're not wasting time setting the agenda. The agenda is the same. We need to spend our time on responses.
Yes, we got the whole thing. That's it.
I'll close this out with with a statement about the conventions. There they established committees, political plans, and circulated petitions that raise funds to support Black newspapers. So, and starting in 1830, really before 1830, what are we talking about? We're talking about Black media. Why do we need Black media? Because Black media should be what we're leaning on to shape Black image and to inform Black people about Black things and things that matter to Black people. And so that don't change. That's what we fight about now. It's amazing. Schools and community building projects. It's what we talk about now. Where do our kids go to school? How are our schools funded? The fact that our schools are more segregated now than they were before Brown. Schools and community building projects. How is it that the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago and the county of Cook, and the county of Cook is the largest county in the United States run by a Black administration? How do all of a sudden y'all have these monies available for community building projects to service the migrants, but you ain't been doing it for the people who live here? It's the same problem. Community building, education and community building projects, and protested racial inequality and state violence. Again, that's George Floyd, Mike Brown, all of this stuff. This is state violence, inequality. We still have housing inequality. We still have redlining. We still have all of those things that we've ever had. Equity or inequity in healthcare, inequity across the board. None of these things have, the issues have not changed. The way they manifest have changed. And to your point, Jerryl, we have a different access now so, you know, those of us who can access whatever it is we think that there is to access, we access it, and then we blame the other folks for not being able to access it, as if the state doesn't have a role to play in this, as if this is not a manifestation of oppression. You know, and so we're going to bring those things to light. And again, we're going to be weaving in, you know, all the relevant movements that we can, you know, possibly, you know, bring to the fore to discuss along the way, because, you know, we are missing, we're literally, we're asleep at the wheel, we're missing the boat, you know, whatever kind of phrase that you want to use, you know, you know, it applies to us. And so we're going to bring, you know, so for you two and Mike Jones, that piece that y'all like to say, you know, we're going to bring the theory of the case, right? We're going to establish that so that people are, you know, are framing this in a more appropriate and historically accurate manner, so that we can benefit from the work of our ancestors, since we like to have all of these colorful declarations about our ancestors. Let's do as our ancestors did.
Outstanding. Jerryl, you have a closing statement?
I agree with everything he just said. Let's do as our ancestors did.
I agree.
That needs to be a t-shirt.
Needs to that well, first of all, in order to do that, we'd have to know. So we got to do some studying too. And they were very, very learned group. Next week, if it's the Lord's will and we live, we are going to merge into this conversation Dr. King's speech, actually his letter from the Birmingham jail. So I would implore us to review that over the week. And also, there's a fairly new book on Dr. King, The Seminarian, that covers Doc's formative years. It, you know, roughly from high school to the Montgomery bus boycott. I'm reading this book along with a, you know, I don't do this often, but there is a book club at WashU's medical school. So I am reading this book with them, and I would invite you all to join in that discussion. If you know, anyone wants it, I would love to send you the link. But we need to have these conversations, and it's very, very important, I think, that we have these conversations in spaces like that because of the healthcare disparity, you know, and we need to talk about that, and we need to let folks understand where we stand on that, and what we think needs to be done, and come up with ways of doing it. So we thank you all for tuning in, and one of these days I'm going to be able to speak with the calmness of Dr. Ron Walters. I don't know how he was always, his presentation style, you know, he was a professor at Howard and at the University of Maryland, I believe. But his presentation style was always so calm with these historical issues. I don't know how he did it, because they incite such emotion. But one of these days I'm going to get there. But we look forward to seeing you guys next week, and thanks for tuning in.